On the 8th of March 2007, amidst the peaceful town of Brunswick, Georgia, Christopher Barrios Jr., a bright-eyed, shy 6-year-old, vanished without a trace, leaving his family shattered.
Police say they feel confident that Christopher didn't just wander off, but was taken. Even though clues are scarce, it hasn't discouraged this community to stop looking, despite emotions that now run deep.
As the hours turned into days and the days into an agonizing week, the search for Christopher intensified.
Whether it's the thickness of the woods or murky canals, volunteers searching for 6-year-old Christopher Barrios say the words "give up" is nowhere in their mindset.
Christopher's family prayed every day for his safe return, while law enforcement and many volunteers from all over searched for him day in and day out.
He's just a baby. He's just a little baby. And I got 8 of them little babies, all under the age of 11. And we want to find him, and we're hoping and praying that he's okay, that we can bring him home, and that's what we're going to do.
Exactly a week later, however, on March 15th, every parent's worst fears became their reality when Christopher's little body was found only a few miles from where they lived, in a trash bag on the side of the road. Who could be so cruel to do this to an innocent 6-year-old? And had they acted alone? This is the heartbreaking case of Christopher Barrios Jr. Christopher Michael Barrios Jr. was a 6-year-old boy born on the 2nd of January 2001 to his father, Christopher Michael Barrios Sr., also known as Mike, and his mother, Latrina Keith, in the city of Brunswick, Georgia. Born into a large family, Christopher had 6 brothers and 2 sisters. Christopher lived with his father, Mike, his father's girlfriend, Paula Anderson, and his half-younger brother, in a trailer at 150 Horseshoe Lane in Canal Road Trailer Park. He was a loving, shy boy who was adored by friends and family. Christopher had a fondness for superheroes such as Spider-Man and Batman. He also loved his bike, video games, and adored a stray cat in his neighborhood he had adopted and named Jimmy. He cherished spending time with his family and was known for his captivating wide smile. Christopher was also described as a good, passionate boy who would always bid his family good night with the words, "Good night, God bless, I love you." Everyone who met Christopher instantly fell in love with him. Christopher's grandmother, Sue Rodriguez, also lived a few properties down at 120 Horseshoe Lane, and Christopher would often visit her trailer after school. However, one day after visiting his grandmother, Christopher disappeared and never made it back home. On the 8th of March 2007, after a day at C.B. Greer Elementary School, 6-year-old Christopher Barrios Jr. visited his grandmother, Sue Rodriguez, who lived just a few trailers down from his family's home. After spending time with her, Christopher headed outside to play. At 6:15 p.m., he was last seen walking towards the nearby playground, his toy lightsaber in hand, ready to enjoy the swings as he often did. However, concern grew when 7:15 p.m. arrived, and Christopher had not yet returned home. Paula Anderson, the girlfriend of Christopher's father, initially assumed that Christopher was still at his grandmother's trailer. However, when Sue Rodriguez informed her that Christopher had left her trailer just after 6 p.m., Paula immediately called Mike to inform him of Christopher's disappearance. His father, Mike, overcome with worry, immediately went out to search for him. Finding no trace of his son, Mike called the police at 8:15 p.m. to report Christopher missing. That evening, search teams quickly assembled, combing the area with the aid of search dogs and ATVs. Christopher was last seen wearing a blue-green pullover sweater, black pants, and white Reebok tennis shoes. Despite their exhaustive efforts, the search parties returned home without any sign of Christopher, planning to resume the search the following morning. The search for Christopher intensified the following day, with more than 300 volunteers joining law enforcement efforts.
It's Carolyn Knabb's first day out to search with her son John.
I have 8 grandbabies, and if something like this happened to me, I'd want people to help me.
As the daylight hours wind down, plans are already in the works for morning. Bright and early, back in gear, this small community isn't standing down.
It's not Jacksonville this time, it's not Savannah, it's us. And now it's our time to come together and do something.
Covering 5 square miles in 4 days.
The search team employed heat-sensing aircraft, helicopters, and cadaver dogs in a desperate bid to find the missing boy. As the community rallied together, posters and flyers were distributed widely, and T-shirts printed with Christopher's face were worn by searchers to help jog the memory of potential witnesses.
They gathered by candlelight and prayed for little Christopher to be found safe.
If you see him, please tell the cops.
He wants his brother home.
In an effort to encourage tips, the police offered a reward of $31,000 for information leading to Christopher's safe return. But despite these extensive efforts, there was no trace of him. Amidst speculation that Christopher might have run away, his father, Mike Barrios, was adamant that his son would never do such a thing. Heartbroken, he made a public plea, saying, "Anyone who has my son, I want them to know I love my son, I miss him, and I want him to come home." In a further effort to locate Christopher, authorities issued a Levi's call, the state's equivalent of an Amber Alert. This was done despite the uncertainty surrounding whether Christopher had been abducted. During the investigation into Christopher's disappearance, detectives interviewed several registered sex offenders in the area, including Christopher's father Mike and a neighbor, George Edenfield, who lived just a few trailers down. Mike Barrios, who had a past conviction for statutory rape in April 1997, was quickly ruled out as a suspect in his son's disappearance, however. The focus shifted dramatically when detectives interviewed George Edenfield, a 32-year-old, residing across the street from Christopher's grandmother's trailer. In a chilling turn, investigators discovered Christopher's Star Wars lightsaber in the Edenfield's yard, marking a significant breakthrough. George confessed to detectives that he had watched Christopher walk home from school around 2:45 p.m. on the day of his disappearance. He shockingly claimed to have murdered Christopher, stating that he was compelled by the devil. Despite his confession, George refused to disclose the location of Christopher's body, fearing that revealing this information would guarantee his imprisonment. Based on his own admission of having recent unsupervised contact with Christopher on the day of his disappearance, George was taken into custody. As the case unfolded, the pressing questions remained. Who exactly was George Edenfield? Could he truly be responsible for Christopher's disappearance? And most importantly, where was Christopher Barrios Jr.? George Edenfield, a 32-year-old resident of the Canal Mobile Home Park, carried a troubling past. In 1997, at the age of 22, he was convicted of molesting a 7-year-old boy and a 9-year-old boy who lived near him. Following his conviction, he was sentenced to 10 years on probation and required to register as a sex offender, during which time he resided with his parents. In 2006, nearly a decade after his conviction, the state of Georgia enacted stricter laws aimed at preventing child molesters from exploiting children in public spaces. Specifically, the new legislation prohibited child molesters from living within 1,000 feet of schools and playgrounds. Consequently, in August 2006, sheriff's deputies informed George that he was in violation of these laws due to his residence's proximity to a playground near downtown Brunswick. After failing to relocate, as initially ordered, George was arrested for violating his probation in September of 2006. A month later, he and his family moved to the Canal Mobile Home Park on Horseshoe Lane, where Christopher also lived a few trailers down. George's failure to comply with the relocation order promptly brought him before Glynn County Superior Court Judge Stephen Scarlett on the 5th of March, 2007, just 3 days before Christopher Barrios Jr.'s disappearance. George pleaded guilty to these charges, and the judge sentenced him to an additional 10 years of probation. Despite the gravity of his probation violation, George was released and permitted to return home. However, George Edenfield was not the only member of his family with a troubling history of sexual misconduct. It emerged that his father, David Edenfield, had been convicted of incest with his daughter in 1993 and was also sentenced to 10 years of probation. the situation within the Edenfield family appeared even more complicated, as George's mother, Peggy, also raised some eyebrows. Following George Edenfield's confession, the investigation rapidly intensified as police turned their attention to his family members. Peggy Edenfield, George's mother, initially gave conflicting and misleading statements to the police. She first claimed that Christopher could be found alive, hidden in a closet in their trailer. This led to an emergency search by the police, which resulted in no signs of Christopher. Peggy later supported George's confession that he had killed Christopher, acknowledging that her son knew where the body was located, but refusing to reveal any details herself. In an attempt to locate Christopher's body, George was brought to the trailer to assist the investigators, yet he failed to provide any useful information. Investigators conducted a follow-up visit to the trailer with a representative from the gas company to perform a methane gas detection test, a byproduct of body decomposition. The test indicated the presence of methane gas inside the trailer, suggesting that a body had been there. In another interview, Peggy Edenfield changed her story once again. This time, she implicated not only her son, but also her husband, David Edenfield, and a family friend, Donald Dale. She confessed to witnessing her son and husband choke Christopher to death. Following this, Peggy admitted to helping clean the boy's body of any fingerprints and DNA evidence, then wrapping it in plastic trash bags. As a result of these revelations, Peggy Edenfield was arrested on the 14th of March 2007 and charged with giving false statements, obstruction of an officer, and concealing the death of another person. David and George were also arrested on the 15th of March 2007 on similar charges. Additionally, family friend Donald Dale was arrested and charged. Christopher's grandmother, Sue Rodriguez, expressed her grief upon hearing about their arrests. She tearfully recounted how she had always told Christopher to avoid the Edenfields after discovering George's name on George's online sex offender registry. She said, "I told him, Christopher, they're not nice people. Stay away from them." After the arrest of the Edenfields, police conducted a thorough search for Christopher's body at a site indicated by David Edenfield and Donald Dale. Despite the use of helicopters and ground searches with cadaver dogs, their efforts were initially unsuccessful due to misleading information, and the search was eventually suspended. However, the search took a heartbreaking turn on the 15th of March 2007. As volunteers scoured the area along Canal Road, 2 officers from the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, Wildlife and Game Division, patrolling on an ATV, noticed tire tracks veering off the road. Following the tracks out of curiosity, they came upon a black trash bag in a field near Brunswick Golden Isles Airport, about 3 miles from the Canal Road trailer park where Christopher lived. Surrounded by a swarm of flies, the bag at first seemed to be ordinary trash, but a closer look revealed a devastating reality. Inside was the decomposing body of a young boy. The authorities were immediately notified, and the site was closed off. Forensic experts confirmed the identity of the body as Christopher Barrios Jr, with confirmation also provided by Christopher's father, Mike Barrios. The autopsy concluded that Christopher had died from asphyxiation and had suffered injuries consistent with sexual abuse, bringing to light the horrific circumstances surrounding his death. Speaking on the tragedy of the event, Glynn County Police Chief Matt During, who escorted his father to the scene to see the body, said, "That was the hardest part. When it's your only son that has been killed and you want to go look for the last time, that's tough." Another searcher also added that they had suspected all along that Christopher was dead, but never wanted it to be true. She said, "You suspected all along in your heart. It's just not the outcome you want. At least we know though. At least it's over." Donald Dale was a former neighbour of the Edenfields when they resided in downtown Brunswick. He and the Edenfield family bonded over their mutual interest in video games. On the evening of the 8th of March 2007, approximately 2 hours after Christopher was last seen, the Edenfields invited Dale to their home under the pretense of a video gaming session. On the 26th of June 2008, more than a year after the tragic events, the prosecution dropped the charges of concealing the death, tampering with evidence, and felony obstruction in connection with Christopher's murder. In return, Dale entered a guilty plea for lying to the police. He had initially misled investigators by falsely claiming that the Edenfields had burned Christopher's body. Dale's attorney, John Wetzler, presented a defense rooted in his client's mental challenges, arguing that Dale's cognitive impairments made him susceptible to manipulation by the Edenfields. According to Wetzler, the Edenfields used Dale's visit under the guise of playing video games to implicate him falsely in the crime. Dale's attorney, John Wetzler, said, "Donnie was in the worst place at the absolutely worst time, and he trusted the wrong people." Wetzler portrayed Dale as mentally challenged, naive, and easily influenced. He contended that Dale's inconsistent statements were due to confusion and a lack of understanding during police questioning. He said, "I don't think he understood my questions, much less the questions being asked by the police. I think the only reason they arrested him was he gave inconsistent statements to them, but that was because he was confused and didn't really understand what they were asking." Tim Frayne, Donald Dale's landlord, provided critical testimony during the trial, asserting that Dale was with him from 9 a.m. until about 8:45 p.m. on the 8th of March 2007. This timeline suggested that Dale could not have been present at the Edenfield home before Christopher was killed. Based on Frayne's testimony and the broader circumstances of the case, the court ultimately decided Dale's sentence. Recognizing his mental disabilities and his low IQ of 60, Donald Dale was remanded to a psychiatric facility for 5 years, followed by probation. The trial of 61-year-old David Homer Edenfield began on the 29th of September 2009, with him facing charges of sexual molestation and the murder of Christopher Barrios Jr. In a bid to avoid a death sentence, Peggy Edenfield agreed to testify against her husband, providing critical evidence to the prosecution. Armed with videotaped confessions, prosecutor John B. Johnson detailed to the jurors how David, along with George and Peggy Edenfield, had cunningly lured Christopher into their trailer, located just across from his grandmother's trailer, before committing the heinous acts and ultimately strangling him. During the trial, the prosecutor painted a vivid picture of the day Christopher disappeared. Paula, the girlfriend of Mike Barrios, testified that she had walked Christopher home from the bus stop on that fateful day. This information was supported by George Edenfield's admission to police that he had seen Christopher returning home from school around 2:45 p.m. It was also revealed that Christopher had been actively moving between his home and his grandmother's, fetching action figures and playing with a Star Wars toy lightsaber his father had recently purchased for him. Shortly after, Christopher was seen heading towards a swing near his grandmother's trailer, sitting on the swing set and playing with his lightsaber. After spending several hours playing, around 6:15 p.m., Christopher decided it was time to head home. He skipped along his usual route towards his grandmother's trailer, which often involved passing through the canal trailer belonging to the Edenfields. However, on passing through, he was accosted by George Edenfield, who lured him into the trailer. Mike Barrios, Christopher's father, testified that he received a call from his girlfriend at around 7:15 p.m, informing him of Christopher's disappearance. He then searched their trailer at the Canal Roads trailer park before reporting Christopher missing just after 8 p.m. Jurors were shown the first hour of the interview David Edenfield gave to a police detective a day after Christopher's body was found, initially blaming his son, George, and denying any involvement, before slowly beginning to describe the horrible scene of killing Christopher. According to David, he and his wife walked into the room where they found their son forcing Christopher to have sex with him. In the video, David Edenfield described George Edenfield as mentally challenged, blaming the murder alone on him before changing his story. He later admitted to touching Christopher himself after Glynn County Police Detective Raymond Sarrow showed him photographs of the boy's dead body, saying Christopher had been crying and pleading for them to stop, promising to report them to his parents. As the horrific act continued, rather than condemning the act, David joined them, forcing Christopher to perform oral sex on him as George sodomized him, and Peggy masturbated. In the videotape played in the courtroom, David Edenfield can be heard saying, "He said, 'I'm going to tell my daddy and my grandma,' and George choked him." Denying culpability at first, he said he told his son to stop choking Christopher, then changed his story again, saying he had placed his own hands on top of his son's while they strangled Christopher together. He said Christopher was crying, not screaming, just kind of scared. He was saying, "No, stop, stop, stop," while George put his hands around his throat and choked him. "I guess it was just instinct. I just wanted to see what it felt like to choke somebody." After Christopher was dead, David said he, George and Peggy Edenfield sexually gratified themselves. David said, "Christopher was dead. I guess it excited all of us." The three then called the family friend Donald Dale, seeking help to dispose of his body in a black trash bag 3 miles away from their home. Continuing with the presentation of evidence, the prosecution played a videotape where David Edenfield admitted to disposing of Christopher's body on the same day he went missing, utilizing a truck provided by Donald Dale rather than his own car. Testimony from law enforcement officers revealed that a woman named Ruth Daniels and her daughter informed them during an interview that Donald Dale had borrowed Ruth's pickup truck around 9 p.m. after receiving a call from David Edenfield by 8:40 p.m. During the trial, jurors were presented with critical medical evidence from Dr. Jamie Downs, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Christopher. Dr. Downs detailed the traumatic condition of Christopher's body and confirmed that he had died from strangulation, which emphasized the brutal nature of the crime. In addition, the court heard testimony from Barbara Retzer, a forensic biologist, regarding the DNA evidence found on Christopher. She explained that the analysis of saliva and semen samples from the bags in which Christopher was wrapped did not match the DNA of the Edenfields. She noted that the lack of a match could have been influenced by the advanced state of decomposition, as well as the heat and humidity affecting the body, which can degrade DNA samples. Despite the gruesome details and evidence presented, the defense struggled to mount a robust case. Defense attorney James Yancey Jr. attempted to cast doubt on the validity of David Edenfield's confession, suggesting that it was influenced by police interrogators. However, on October 5, 2009, following 2 hours of intense deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict, finding David Edenfield guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to death. As the judge read out the sentence, David Edenfield stood passively, showing no outward reaction to the final judgment. Christopher's grandmother, Sue Rodriguez, said, "He got his justice. Christopher got it today. Now we've got 2 more to go." David Edenfield's trial was just the beginning of the legal proceedings in the tragic case. After David was sentenced to death row, attention turned to the other family members implicated in the crime. George Edenfield, David's son, was also charged with the abduction, molestation, and killing of Christopher. However, in 2010, Superior Court Judge Stephen Scarlett ruled George mentally incompetent to stand trial based on extensive psychological evaluations and historical reports from the Glynn County school system and social services dating back to 1980, which classified George as mentally disabled.
So if you ask him if you want to testify, he might say yes, and if you said, well, you sure, he might say no.
I can't imagine Mr. Edenfield being able to make the kinds of decisions that he would have to make through the trial process.
As a result, Judge Scarlett ordered his immediate transfer to a Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities institution for further assessment and care, highlighting the complexities involved in such a deeply troubling case. Peggy Edenfield, after testifying against her husband, faced her own set of charges, including 2 counts of felony murder and several other serious charges related to the case. Her trial was initially set for the 26th of September 2011, however, in a significant turn of events, Peggy opted to plead guilty to 5 of the 8 charges before her trial could begin. Acknowledging her role in the horrifying acts, she was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Following the trial and sentencing of Peggy Edenfield, Christopher's father, Mike Barrios, and his grandmother were happy with the sentencing. Speaking on Peggy's sentencing, Mike Barrios said, "It's good to see that she will die in prison, but she deserves worse. Nothing will bring Christopher back." His grandmother said, "I feel like Christopher got some justice today. She's gone for good now. She won't ever get out to do this to someone else's innocent baby." David Edenfield, who was initially sentenced to death in 2014, has made several attempts to challenge his sentence. In 2018, he sought a writ of habeas corpus, arguing that his death penalty sentence should be overturned due to intellectual disability and ineffective legal representation. In 2022, David petitioned to overturn his sentence on the grounds of ineffective legal counsel, leading a Butts County court to vacate his death sentence, and this decision temporarily lifted the death penalty. However, in 2023, the Supreme Court reinstated his death sentence after reviewing the case, and David Edenfield now awaits execution on death row at the Diagnostic State Prison. A local official familiar with George Edenfield's case asked for a stricter form of probation, but a state official persuaded the court that it was unnecessary. Apparently, during the 10 years of George's probation since 1997, no one had come forward with a criminal complaint against him. Christopher's grandmother said, "If the judge would have kept in him jail, our baby would be here. He wouldn't have been in heaven with God."
Christopher, he was to brighten up everybody, you know, make you smile. The smile alone is enough. I mean, he's gorgeous. Never would hurt anybody. I can understand why they did this to a child, period.
What's justice for you?
Justice for me is to see them get what they deserve, which should be death.
Christopher's mother, Latrina Keith, filed a wrongful death lawsuit in state court in Glynn County against the owner of the trailer park where Christopher lived. In the lawsuit, Latrina Keith claimed that the trailer park owner, Sharon O'Quinn of Brunswick, knew that it was a dangerous place for children because she knowingly rented the trailer lots to convicted child molesters. Latrina Keith also claimed that Sharon O'Quinn had received numerous complaints about George Edenfield from other residents in the trailer park, and that she should have known that he posed a danger to Christopher. Latrina Keith also sued a caseworker at the Georgia Department of Children and Family Services for acting in a gross and negligent manner. She alleged that the social worker failed to protect Christopher by placing him in the custody of his father, Mike Barrios, a convicted sex offender. She requested a trial by jury and a judgment against Sharon O'Quinn and the caseworker for the full value of the life of Christopher Barrios, as well as funeral costs, but I cannot find information anywhere on the outcome of this lawsuit. Overall, this case is completely heartbreaking, and it was such a difficult one to cover. It truly is a stark and devastating reminder of the depths of cruelty that can exist in the world. Christopher, a young boy full of life and potential, was subjected to unimaginable horrors by individuals who can only be described as monstrous. The terror and pain he must have endured in his final moments are beyond comprehension, and something I don't want to even imagine.
A baby that couldn't defend himself. A baby that loved life, that loved his grandma and loved his daddy, and loved his brothers, and loved his mom. But yet, he didn't have no say on when he's gonna die.
These 3 evil monsters deserve to be behind bars for the rest of their lives. Whilst their incarceration is a necessary step towards justice, it still does very little to mend the broken hearts of Christopher's family or restore the innocence lost that fateful day. My heart goes out to Christopher's family and to everyone impacted by this brutal crime, and as always, rest in peace, Christopher Barrios Jr.